Dear candidates, today I shall be giving you small and little tips on planning and preparing your learning sessions. How do I, as a candidate, complete concise working plans for individual learning sessions within my diploma program? Which means you have to, for the certification course, you have to make 2 such learning sessions or the lesson plans. And such preparation must be based on a thorough understanding of theory, mediated through your own knowledge of the situation in which you work, your knowledge of your students, and your own common sense. So, we'll be looking at some of the requirements for each learning session. Each learning session should include designing aims and objectives, selecting the most appropriate learning activity, planning for differentiation, specifying how learner progress and achievement are going to be measured and reviewed. Now we'll discuss each of these components little more in detail. We look at the component 1 on designing aim and objectives. Aims always reflect the long-term goals, and it gives a flavor of the program, like I keep telling you in all my sessions. While objectives are very session specific, there can be 2 to 3 objectives or sub-objectives depending on what exactly you want to develop, either in terms of concept development or skill development. The objectives will vary depending on the activity, depending on the importance of the skill that you want the children to acquire, the time that you want to give, and how you would want to relate to the previous learned topics. So the objectives can go across as being repeated many times during the academic year, or can be taught as a very short-term goal, which can be done at one term and forgotten. But some objectives are repeated all through the year, which are called as the long-term objectives. And these objectives are often referred to as SMART, and the acronym which you all know. The objectives have to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-related. And of course, these are expressed. The objectives are expressed in terms of student outcomes. Usually, though not always, the learning objectives describes what? It describes what the student will be able to do by the end of the session. For example, if I say, by the end of the session, the student will be able to multiply a double-digit number by a single-digit number without the aid of a calculator. Exceptions to this are when the objective involves not product of a lesson, but a process followed through the lesson. For example, the student will participate in a 5-a-side basketball game. That is, a team has 5 members in one side, observing the rules, accepting the referee's decisions without question, and playing to the best of his ability. Please look here. This basketball game specifies that the student will participate in a 5-member team on one side, and the students will observe the rules. The third component, they will accept the referee's decision without question. See the condition that is laid. And finally, they will play to the best of their ability. Now, both these objectives address the learner's needs and meet the SMART criteria. When I say both the objectives, one example which I gave with reference to mathematics, and one with example to the basketball game, both have, of course, the objectives that addresses the learner needs. But if we were to break down the two objectives into their performance, conditions, and standards, let us see what the task is with reference to the first objective of doing the multiplication with a double digit number. The performance is the students will multiply a double digit number by a single digit number. Now let us see what the performance in the basketball game is. The students will participate in a basketball game. So you are clear with the performances that the children will be doing in both the objectives. Let us see how the conditions are laid down. Now with reference to the multiplication component, the conditions are given pencil and paper but without calculator, because the objective said without the aid of a calculator. So I just give the students a pencil and a paper and without a calculator. The second condition for the basketball game is given two teams selected by the teacher. The teacher will select the team. So that point is made clear that no one will form a group of their own interest or going with the friends to make up a team. The standards that will be set in the first objective, the students, what is the standard that I can set for a mathematical problem? There should be no errors. So the students will perform multiplying a double digit number by a single digit number under the conditions that they will use only a pencil and a paper without a calculator, and the standard that they will maintain is they will write down the answer without an error. Now let's look at the second basketball game. The performances, students participate in a basketball game and they will belong to a team. The condition is that the team will be made by the teacher, and the standard that they will fall into while playing the game is they will observe the rules of the game, they will accept the referee's decision without question, and finally they will play to the best of his ability. So the objective has been broken down into a performance, a condition and a standard. So the second objective focuses our minds on standards. So consider two children who took part in the game. Boy A is an outstanding basketball player. He participated in the game but obviously did not try his best. Once or twice he threw his arms up in frustration at the referee's decisions. Now comes boy B, who has little interest and even less ability. However, he did his best and was happy to accept the referee's decisions, even when on one occasion he was barged off the ball. So which boy meets the standards? This example shows the importance of specifying standards so that they achieve what you want them to achieve. Clearly, in this instance, the teacher's aim was to socialize the children and not to identify potential school team players, if you look at the standards. So the individual lesson objectives must support the long-term aim. The long-term aim is to help children to socialize and to identify the school team players. That is a long-term goal. So it has to be very clearly laid down as performance, conditions and standards as you jot down the objectives so that the children are clear and you are clear in making them achieve the standards of performance, and they fall within the conditions which can vary from time to time and the task can vary from time to time. The second part that I'll be dealing in detail under planning and preparing learning sessions is to select the most appropriate learning activity. And often said and done in recent years, there has been of course a movement in many schools to go back to whole group teaching away from small group work. Typically, a whole group teaching will include a direct transmission style teaching followed by individual pair or group work with the plenary session with the children, and the teacher will summarize the lesson and share what has been learnt. Key to the success of such teaching is purely the teacher's skill in asking questions and dealing with answers in such a way that all learners are involved and not just the clever or outspoken minority. So one such learning activity is questioning technique. In the lesson method, the questioning technique is a very broad-based technique and has been used successfully for many years. It may sound that it is a very simple method of asking question and answers in a class, even in a whole class instruction. But If I am going to try it, the rewards will be better class control, higher levels of concentration, and of course, more sharply focused lessons can happen. And the following technique that I'm going to describe has been used successfully many years in military settings and corporate training sectors. And let's see how this can be planned. And the rule one under the questioning technique could be that, as far as possible, plan all your questions before the lesson. Rule 2. Begin all your questions with words like who, what, when, where, why, and how. So I relate this to the 5 wives and 1 husband. The question word itself will alert the children to the coming question. Teachers who are in the habit of putting the question word at the end of the question are often rewarded with the answer, "Can you repeat the question, please, miss?" This wastes the time and it frustrates the teacher and the class, and it slows down the pace of the lesson. Test this for yourself. Ask your class something like, "What was the name of the ship that sank in 1912 on its way to America?" Then ask a different group. You change the way you pose the question now. The ship that sank in 1912 on its way to America was the what? Never ask, "Can anyone tell me?" questions. This encourages unhelpful calling out and discourages weaker students from participating. So, when you ask a question which is very aptly framed, like "What was the name of the ship that sank in 1912 on its way to America?" is very clearly understood by the children, and they will never ask, "Can you repeat the question, please, ma'am?" But if the words in a question pattern are not framed appropriately, like the ship that sank in 1912 on its way to America was the what? Of course, the children get confused and they have a tendency to ask you to repeat the question. So, rule number 3 is always plan on closed and open questions. Now, many of you may know the answer for this, and for those who need a clarification, a closed question has only one possible correct answer, like yes or no. Right? So this is the ideal question type to check all your recall of information that you give. Like how you ask, "Have you all understood?" They say yes or no, and then you proceed with the class. An open question has more than one acceptable answer, and it is helpful for extending the pupil's thinking and moving from one point to the next. And it can also have questions that include higher order thinking skills for children to apply and then answer, think and answer, analyze and answer. And rule 4, when you have these questions framed in the class, use question answer as a technique in the class. Do not allow your class to raise the hands or call out the answers. You decide who will answer your question. So the military manuals generally describe a very important method. The military manuals say pose, pause, and pounce method. Pose the question beginning with the question word. For example, "What is the?" Then you pause as you look around the group. You don't proceed with the question. You start posing the question with few words. You pause for a moment and then you look around the group and then nominate someone of your choice to answer the question. In this way, the skillful teacher can involve everyone in the class, and she can direct simple closed questions to weaker pupils to help build their confidence. And she can, of course, definitely frame more challenging questions with "Why do you think so?" and "What do you think would have happened?" and setting them to some kind of a thinking process. It can be addressed to children who are a little more confident in understanding your question, who can express well, and so stronger pupil to extend their thinking and encourage them to formulate their ideas, build on their ideas in words. And a teacher who follows this rule will be, of course, she'll be in complete control of the class. Rule 5 is acknowledge every answer. You need to definitely acknowledge, saying, "Oh, that was an excellent answer. You are very close to this answer. I think probably you need a little more time to think on arriving at the correct answer." So there are ways to acknowledge and appreciate and give feedback. And if you feel the whole class wants little guidance, you may have to redo the entire teaching for a while and then arrive at the correct answer. If an answer to a closed question is wrong, then say so. But ask someone else the same question, and if the answer is still wrong, then there may be something wrong with your question. That's what I mean to say. Either it has been poorly worded or it is pitched out too high a level for a class. So you need to modify and monitor the way you frame the questions depending on where they are standing as you start reflecting as the session is on. As you use your metacognitive steering control, you know how you need to reframe your questions, how you need to make it more difficult or simple depending on the levels of understanding or the complexity of the topic, and note the problem and reflect later upon why it could not be answered. If the answer is correct, then say so and repeat it for the reinforcement for the whole class to listen to, and praise the student for giving the correct answer. An answer to an open question cannot be wrong, of course. Now, the students would offer to develop the lesson as you have planned and acknowledge the answer as interesting and useful and praise the student. And this would definitely fall into the theory of behaviorism of motivating every student to make an attempt to at least express or utter a word of an answer boldly in the class, and also help them to raise questions in the class. If you encourage children to question in the class, by and large, they would definitely fill up the chart of KWLQA, which means what I know, what I want to know, what I have learned, what are the questions that remain unanswered, and what I want to really apply or go further in my learning. So, for example, questioning, if appropriately done, if it is pre-planned, can be used as an excellent tool of differentiation in the class, and you get to really know where the children stand, and this also paves in a way to develop a metacognitive learning environment in the class. And sometimes you can use some reflective questions, which I will give you as a tip at the end of these audio lessons. The next component that comes under appropriate learning activity can be a group work. Of course, group work often allows on the heels of the traditional lesson and is a chance for pupils either to consolidate their learning or they extend it. Now, the alert teacher is forever circulating among the groups, and she becomes a facilitator, and she guides the children, and she advises and encourages in effect remaining in control of the learning environment. The first question to address when planning group work is who decides the group. There is a merit in allowing the children to gravitate towards their friends, for it avoids a good deal of time wasting. So, but the teacher who takes the responsibility for pupil learning will plan the learning groups with the objectives in mind. So, this may mean setting the children according to the ability levels, so that different tasks can be given to different ability levels, which is very important when you group the children. Generally, the teachers fear most from this technique because they lose control. A more positive way of viewing this is that the teacher hands over some degree of control of the students' learning to students themselves. And grouping also can be according to the learning styles, so that the task set have the best chance of engaging them. This happens when you start differentiating and knowing the learning needs of the children. In a class where there is a heterogeneous grouping, at each session, depending on the topic, depending on the objective, depending on their prior knowledge, all matters a lot when you start grouping the children. So a teacher has to really know the learner needs, to identify, to group them, so that the time is not wasted as the session is on in grouping them. You need to think prior to the session as to who all have a prior knowledge for which you should have done a diagnostic test, and that makes your job easier in aligning the group, which can be introduced to the class as a surprise at the beginning of the class, that group A will include this, group B will be this, or group C, or there can be sometimes random grouping with their birth month, with the birth date, or a different way of the names starting with the alphabets. A can be in one group, B can be in one group. So how you select to do the grouping can have elements of surprise, it can have elements of little heterogeneity in the group without knowing the ability level. If you want to do a random grouping, these are some of the techniques. And of course, children quickly become used to the style of learning, and the teacher can expect the pupils for whom this still is a novelty to need clear directions and time to adjust. It is wise to set each group a very specific time related task. This is called setting up task card, and each group can be given a different task, such as list 10 reasons why Dubai attracts so many visitors, and put these in order of importance. Before the group begins its deliberations, you nominate which member of the group will present the answers and how long they have to make their decisions. But then the question that you post, like 10 reasons of why Dubai attracts, may have varied answers by different groups. And when you collate the answers, you get to know really if there are 25 to 30 children in a class, you will have at least 30 different views of why Dubai attracts more visitors. And you can come out with a novel travelogue that is made and that is put there as tourist attractions. And then they can make a real historical brochure on how Dubai was in the earlier years and how the government has spent money on improving the tourism component and how it fetches money to a country, getting into the economy of a country, and you can start integrating it as much as possible. Thus, you give an opportunity to the students to extend their learning beyond the objectives that you assign as a task. The planning decision on how to group the children and how to manage the groups, of course, it rests with the teacher. If things go well, you rejoice, and if things go wrong, make a note of what happened and why in your reflective log journal. Another option for having a variety in selecting the learning activity can also be a field trip or off-site visits, and these provide exciting opportunities for students to learn outside the classroom. But it does involve some of the novel situations will involve many risks, and you need to be assessing the risk factor, like the level of risk is always equal to the severity multiplied by the likelihood of the happening. So you need to tabulate it as severity, then likelihood, and then whether it falls within a low risk range or a medium risk range or a high risk range. And there are many examples to go with, like sailing, and then some adventurous trip taken, and then on going on to a place where it warrants for some kind of safety measures to be adopted with reference to health conditions, going to alpine regions. So the field trip just doesn't end with going to visiting a zoo or a post office, but when you think of going to visiting a country also, where there can be a climate change, a seasonal change, and the way you need to safeguard your health, and with prior health conditions of the students when you go on a field trip to a place. I'm just quoting an example, but as a teacher you need to assess why they are taken to a place, even like a zoo, and what is it that they will go and look there. And you need to be very clear with the objectives and frame questions for the children to find out as they visit. And when they come back, there will be a post-observation form that has to be filled in by the children as a component of a learning of what had happened. But you need to be very clear in telling children why they are visiting even a zoo or a museum, or even playing on a sand pit, and what is the objective of that. You need to be very clear with children when you explain to them, or when you celebrate special days, or when you take them to a market, and what is it that they are going to learn. At least have 5 to 6 objectives framed clearly, explained in a small sheet of paper, sent to the parents, and also see how they depict the learning that they have had as a first-hand, hands-on experience of learning. So much depends on how much effort the teacher takes to make this field trip a real learning entity rather than being inside the classroom. But the same objective of relating to real life experiences becomes better with the field trip. So teachers can think of planning this also as one of the sessions in their learning processes. Another component that you need to take care of is, of course, differentiation. And for a certification course, you need to just go into at a very preliminary level of how differentiation plays an important role in catering to the different learning needs of the children. And once as a teacher you master the science of writing very smart learning objectives, and I've extended them to include the conditions and standards. Like how I told you, it becomes very easy to differentiate by performance or task, differentiate by conditions, and differentiate by standards. And I think this can be like, for example, if I'm going to have a possible, though it's very time consuming to set a different task for each student in a class, but with younger children, individual differentiation by task is relatively simple. And themed work can often be collected into a class folder and donated to a school library for everyone to read. For example, a class book about earthquakes can offer innumerable opportunities for such contributions. Differentiation by task, a typical example would be to make a class book on a topic like earthquakes. So, how can I differentiate the task now? Yes, this could include a book cover or drawings of earthquake scenes and reviews of movie about the earthquakes. Then somebody can give a scientific explanation with diagrams of what causes an earthquake. Of course, a newspaper or magazine articles about the earthquakes, then the photographs of earthquakes, list of interesting earthquake websites. You need to bring in the technology also. Writing an exciting story about someone who was caught up in an earthquake, and of course you can have puzzles created, a crossword created, and world map where you mark the zones, the earthquake prone countries colored in it. Of course, an advice leaflet about what to do if you are caught up in an earthquake, and any 10 biggest earthquakes ever, they can do a small analysis and bring with details about the damage and the casualties, and it can go with a higher level of explanations with higher grades also, though you might start at a lower level with simple facts mentioned, but with the higher grades they can even go up to how the final products and accuracy of their own findings are going to be, and how precautionary measures can be taken in a place where the country is prone to experience such earthquakes very often, and how are the citizens generally equipped to face such natural disasters, and how do they even build on houses, keeping all this in mind. So the complexity of the task that you give can vary from grade to grade. So the list is limited, of course, but then the differentiation is about the teacher identifying the appropriate pathways to higher cognitive and intellectual development, and of course implementing them with great care. And when I say conditions, of course, as I told you, even in the case of mathematics, when you framed an objective, they can either use a calculator or they can be without using the calculator. So you can relax the condition a little, and they can either make one mistake or two mistakes when you come to the standards, but at one stage they have to be doing the sums without any errors. So slowly they reach the standard of performance, but the conditions are relaxed a little. And by standards, of course, as I told you, you can even say that a child in a basketball while playing can make an attempt to fail learning the rules that the child has to follow, but very consciously if the child learns how to socialize and become a best team player, you can give him few opportunities to reach the standard of being qualified to be a part of the school team. So it goes like that, where at minimal level you differentiate even the worksheets, and you differentiate the questions, and you differentiate them by ability groups, you differentiate them by giving them content with their much likable learning style, and it just goes, and it's a very deep topic for you to be doing an individual research. And of course there are many common methods of differentiation that can be used in a classroom, and differentiation is all about ensuring success and preventing failure. So if your learners are repeatedly not completing the tasks you set to your satisfaction, then you should revisit your objectives and consider differentiating either the required performance, the conditions under which the performance is to be carried out, or the standards you expect. And I need to specify something on the resources that you will need to achieve to the stated learning objectives. Of course, the resources include people also sometimes, Do you need the assistance of the laboratory technician, a librarian, or a classroom support worker? So the people also come in as a resource. Don't think just the talk, the chalk, and the videos are going to be your resources, but there are occasions when you need the help of experts also in contributing to achieving a skill or a task. And similarly, the equipment, what are you going to use? Either a YouTube, or you're going to use a video or a camera or a flip chart or an organizer, or how is it going to be? Or is it going to be some tool pad with some technical tools that you're going to use? Then the materials, do you need the pen, the pencil, the paper, the transparencies, depending on the apps and the gadgets that you use, the finance. Do you need money to even organize for a field trip, as I was saying, or a guest speaker? Then how do I invite? How do I even mention about the objectives or the limit or the level to which the guest has to keep up to the content level, and then give some time for interaction or buy some consumables if some kind of finance were involved in organizing a project? Then of course time is one of the very, very important resource that you need to look into. Can you achieve your lesson objective in one session, or do you need more time? And location, of course, where are you going to conduct the session? Is it going to be a very rigid, structured classroom scenario, or you want them to be taken out on the field or under the tree or into a museum or a big library or a park or a theater? Where do you want them to be taken into? So all that matters a lot when you plan the resources. Wherever resources or whatever resources you decide to use should serve one or more of the following purposes. What are the following purposes? Of course, it should provide very interesting information, then it should give examples, and it should arouse interest in me as a resource. If I give a book as a resource, that book should attract me in terms of flipping through the pages, gaining some extra information, and stimulate the exchange of ideas within my own mind, and sharing it with the friends and share my opinions, and also to stimulate real life context. So with those thoughts in mind, you could consider using amongst others the following. Of course, the boards, sometimes the felt board, the whiteboard, the chalkboard, the electronic whiteboard, the blackboard. They are very, very versatile, and they are highly an essential aid in helping teacher to construct the learning. I always say Blackboard is one of the best resources that you can use. Now that you have shifted to offline mode of learning, make the best use of the board, the green board, the whiteboard, or the interactive board as one of the best resources. And it appeals to those who are both visually styled learners. And too many teachers, however, abuse the boards and they use them as scribbling pads, and they accept boards already cluttered with the leftovers of the previous lesson also. They send messages to the students, and presentation does not matter. Be as untidy and unprepared as I am. No, teachers, that sends a message actually. If you use a very, very cluttered board with the leftovers of the previous lesson, what I mean to say is it conveys a message that it is okay to be little clumsy, it is okay to be unprepared, it doesn't matter, I need to present a good tidy work. So it conveys indirectly a message to the children. So teachers who plan the boards project the standards of care and attention to detail that they wish their students to emulate. Just as you plan every question, as I told you in the questioning technique, you should plan every word and diagram that you are going to be displaying on the board. Every color you use, the bullet point you insert, every boxed in piece of information, every example of underlining, plan everything. So the interactive whiteboards, of course, remain a very expensive resource, but they do allow the students to participate without having to get out of their seats and approach the front. The magnetic boards, the felt boards are less expensive, and it allows you to carefully prepare the visual aids with ease, and on repeated occasions do consider the advantages over a traditional chalkboard also. Of course, now you have the multi-purpose smart boards where you can play the audio, the video, even the mobile phones for that matter, where you can get live on to many YouTube videos, selected portions of a video clippings which you need to really ascertain that only this portion of the video will be seen, this portion of the video will be shown. So it minimizes on what exactly needs to be seen and how you can save on the time management and how you really make it very interesting as a 2 to 3 minute clipping. And that makes the learning more interesting rather than showing a video clipping of 5 minutes and then asking them a questions which is either neglected by them by being observed very intently, very keenly. So they miss out on all this unless you have a clarity on what is a portion of the clipping that needs to be revisited again and again. Of course, radio programs can also be taped and they can also be played for people who wish to choose on to media communications. How the voice modulation needs to be when you question, when you answer, when a person interviews, another person. So all this can be thought of as being used as excellent resources. Of course, computer software can be for those who are tactile and kinesthetic learners, and opportunities are plenty for learners to explore new knowledge with the touch of the button. And there are many software available now across the subjects. With the touch of the button, you get to know the models, the methods, the theories, and students to some extent can be engaged in a flipped classroom learning. And as candidates, I want you all to do that in practice when you come for the sessions next time, that you will all listen to the webinar that I had sent on following the academic conventions in writing, the referencing styles that you need to follow. And when you have the e-portfolio created to write your evidences of learning, practice and reflection. Of course, handouts sometimes are very, very effective for visual learners, and auditory learners also enjoy learning through the reading of the worksheets and the handouts. And for the teacher, it frees up the valuable class contact time, allowing for more access to individuals who need personal attention. And some can be flipping through the handouts, those who have finished, and you can be with the children who need the extra support. Broadly speaking, there are two types of handouts. One is as an information sheet, which many teachers complain is never read by students, but is just filed away or lost. And letters home about parents' evening sometimes suffer this fate. The more useful handout is the worksheet, the second type, which comes in several ways. The worksheet can be a job sheet. When do I say it's a job sheet? It can be targeted at individuals, so an excellent tool for differentiation. It is a job card. Like student fills in the missing information either from following the lesson or from their own research, but it is targeted at the individual. The next one is an operation sheet. Presents an operational instructions in words. So for you to perform an operation, pictures so that students can complete the task without a teacher demonstration. It's like a manual where you have the pictures and you have the instructions in words. You follow that to assemble a toy or assemble a machine or assemble a unit. So it's similar to that you perform without the teacher being physically present to demonstrate. So that's an operation sheet. Then comes the assignment sheet, often given to the students to solve the problems, to solve questions, and of course used as either an extension of the learning or the reinforcement or the homework. So the worksheets, the handouts can be very effectively used if the teacher decides to bring in a variety of just not opening up the classwork and homework sheet, but goes beyond and utilizing it, the worksheet, with a purpose. The next component comes as a preparation of equipment and learning facilities. So you need to prepare the learning environment and preparation of if you can't use it, don't use it. It's like book scarce resources in advance, double check the availability on the day. If you want to help children to lay their hands on some books, check if the books are available. If they are scarce and you find that the equipment is not as many as the students are and the learning facilities are not better for a child, if it is a lab where there needs to be enough lighting and you feel the facilities are not there, you need to really check on these equipment and learning facilities. And of course, the social component of learning also matters a lot, rather than a very comfortable learning environment. An effective teacher is always in control, and one key to achieve this is She prepares a learning environment to create a purposeful atmosphere, free of disruption. There should not be much of disturbance. At the same time, it should be socially comfortable, emotionally comfortable, and also physically comfortable. So, when preparing the physical environment, at least the teachers can consider the learning space, whether it is sufficiently heated, ventilated, is it clean, bright, and attractive in terms of all the classroom boards, the blackboard, the general classroom ventilation, and how about the furniture? Is it okay to sit with a purpose in the furniture, adequately lit room? So, sometimes one question that I ask myself when looking at the empty room just before the class enters, you can always ask this question: what message does this room send to the learners about me and the way I teach? You have this question in your mind. Before you enter an empty room, please ask this: what message does this room send to the learners about me and the way I teach? So, an overheated room also sometimes with litter and the charts hanging off the wall and desks higgledy piggledy from the previous class where it's all distorted and the benches are not arranged properly. It also sends the students an unambiguous message: this teacher does not care. So all these unspoken actions, words, all this convey a lot of meaning about the teacher, which the teacher is not aware of. An untidy and uncomfortable physical environment is not conducive to learning. So an orderly classroom reflects well of the teacher and allows her to create the positive social environment necessary. She adopts a business-like but caring approach to her work. You can always, like I keep saying, you can create enthusiasm as you enter into the room. Your doorknob, your classroom doorknob can say, please do not disturb. We are learning to convert degree Celsius into degree Fahrenheit and we need to concentrate. Thank you. A board can be hung at the entrance so that others are curious and they know some serious learning is happening. And plan for evaluation, and you need to have two distinct forms of evaluation that should be continually at work in the classroom. The first involves evaluating the performance of your students against your own stated learning objectives. The second is an evaluation of your own effectiveness as a teacher, where reflection plays a crucial role. Metacognitive structured thinking patterns play a crucial role, or your own data from the assessments that you have kept, you evaluate, and that talks a lot about the way the performance of the students have been in the class. And for evaluating the student performance, there can be informal formative evaluation, which is very constant, and so you ask relevant, well-framed questions and they answer, and and as they set about their set tasks, you observe their body language and the amount of time they apply themselves continuously to the task in hand, and that. So you end the session by gathering the students together and then asking them to summarize what they have learned. You call this the plenary session and present their finished pieces of work. You may opt for a more formal end to the lesson with the children settling down for a short written test also. All these perfectly valid methods of student evaluation should be considered and planned into your session. So teachers these days are rightly held accountable for the students' results. So there are times in the learning program when more formal testing is mandatory. So such tests may be summative and required for the purposes of awarding end-year grades and issuing the certificates. And evaluating your own performance, of course, you need to be a reflective practitioner, and you need to be thoughtful about your own work and constantly seek to improve your quality performance. You have to be self-critical and may indeed award yourself pats on the back, but you need to have the ability to distance yourself from what you do in the classroom and to pass judgment on it very objectively. So be in the path of continuous self-improvement and plan for reflection both before as the session is on and at the end of the session. So it is for you to decide how you are going to reflect best on your work. In the session plan above, you will note that this teacher has planned to reflect on her work after school over a cup of coffee, to fill in a daily log, and some may fill in an open-ended question, unstructured approach to self-reflection. But if it is unstructured, it is very difficult to sustain over a long period of time. So teachers have to choose a design, as I had told you in some of the theories with template questions. Follow any theory with sample prompts and questions which you can use as a standard questionnaire for you to reflect. So the reflective practitioner will also be open to feedback, and you should look for a feedback. And of course, sometimes there is a 360-degree feedback, and anonymous feedback also sometimes helps the learner to feel, and children also need to be trained the same way to have some reflective questions posed by them to assess their own learning, evaluate their own learning. That also becomes helpful for you to monitor your teaching pattern and teaching style. And parents can be another important source of feedback. Teacher can ask a group of parents if they would find out how the child felt about a particular session, and discuss the child's response with the parents over phone or at a face-to-face meeting. So colleagues can also become critical friends who are invited into the class. So when you do your sessions, please do have a feedback taken from all these corners so that it becomes a 360-degree feedback. So all this should be initiated by the teacher herself. So you go out of your way to find out how well your teaching is being received and how prepared to make whatever adjustments are appropriate. And such a teacher is truly a reflective practitioner. And you also need to specify how you will measure the learner achievement. And of course, this will be a very important component of the assessment, the fourth formative and the summative. And will it be through a question and answer, or a written short answer test, an essay, or observation, or by any other means altogether? So you look into the components of the assessment and see how you can embed for each of the activities that you decide how your formative assessment is going to be matching to the objective, matching to the activity, so that you can evaluate the performance of the students and come to a conclusion whether the activity was really helpful in achieving the objective and how did the children participate. So there are innumerable varieties of informal formative assessments, and then the summative assessments, and then the formative assessments can be sometimes a structured summative assessments at the end of each unit, but then try to go through the summative and the formative assessments once again, and you have any doubt you can post the questions in the group. Let me list out some typical group tasks which you can think on including in your sessions. When you assign different contexts in which group work can be used, but just to get your imagination fired up, I am giving you a few tips. As a group task, it can be on problem solving, it can be on development of case studies, it can be a brainstorming session, it can be developing a component of a role play, then it can be on providing learner feedback via a focus group, it can be on a design work or designing a work, it can be on peer assessment group, then analysis of findings by group, then it can be a data collection by a group task, working up a case for a debate, they can work in groups, developing a course of action. It doesn't really matter which level or age, culture or subject your learners are from. You will find that properly designed and managed learners can get to higher order learning skills very quickly through the group work, that they take the ownership of their group work and thus can recall its process and product relatively easily. As many candidates wanted to have an insight on the session observations that are made, we keep emphasizing that the best teachers are always keen and willing to learn. And the best way of learning is, of course, doing from experience. And that's why this certification is all about the experience that you derive out of your new learnings, implementing new strategies, finding out your own potentials, and trying out which you had never tried out before. And it gives a scope for you to enhance your professional knowledge and skills for the betterment of the same. But we know that it isn't always the case, because unless we have time to reflect on, we do, the more likely it is we will carry on with our existing practice, good or bad or indifferent. So how important it is to maintain a reflective journal is that it can help us to recall very significant events that have occurred both inside and outside the classroom. And at a later date, it can remind us of what happened so we can learn from the experience. And this is where receiving critically constructive feedback of our practice from a professional observer, such as a mentor, a colleague, or a manager, or a teacher trainer, can help. Many teachers find the most valuable part of any teacher training program is the feedback they receive from an observed lesson. And as an observer, many roles and responsibilities go while observing a class. And as a practice-based qualification for this certification, the candidates obtaining feedback from a colleague or a mentor or a peer acting as a professional observer for each of the 3 different activities they are required to undertake. One is you observe an experienced practitioner's class and you give your own feedback in discussion with the mentor. And the next 2 sessions are being observed by your peer or by the mentor compulsorily, or a senior colleague or a teacher or an observer who really needs to know what needs to be observed and given to you as a feedback. The role of a reflective practitioner is crucial as a teacher who is engaging in the certification course, and they must know what they are looking for and the approach to take for each activity. It is a normal practice for an observer to make notes and record both general and specific points when observing a lesson. So the Cambridge observation record generally uses a common format, no matter what the context, which is then used as the basis for a professional dialogue during the feedback session. A question then arises, who should then act as a professional observer? Who can we call as an additional observer or a mentor? And if a mentor has to become a professional observer, what should they be looking for in the different activities? When experimenting using a new teaching and learning approach, as required in your Unit 1, the professional observer could be an experienced colleague from the same curriculum area who is a qualified teacher, or a mentor who is an experienced and a qualified teacher, and a qualified teacher trainer who is familiar with your role as a teacher, or a manager who will act in a supportive rather than a judgmental role. And it is important that the observer is aware of not only the learning aims and objectives of the session being observed, but how the teacher is attempting to change and improve their practice. This means the feedback must focus on the key processes of both teaching and learning, and how active learning is being facilitated. The most useful and instructive observations come about when the professional observer acts as a critical friend and indicates not only what went well in the lesson, but what didn't go so well. As a part of the professional dialogue, which normally takes place sometime after the lesson, to leave time for reflection, the observer should discuss and make suggestions as to how the new approach being adopted can be further developed and improved. And let's see how this approach can be defined as the praise sandwich approach. This is a small example of using the praise sandwich approach, and this has been depicted in the book that I prescribed, Developing Teaching and Learning by Bob and Ray Ayton. The example of a teacher called Diana, who is in her 2nd year of teaching. As part of her timetable, Diana teaches a class of 18 mixed ability and mixed gender 16-year-old learners studying life skills. The session to be observed is a 2-hour lesson on how to cook a themed fish dish. Mainly due to the lack of planning, the time management, and being fairly new to teaching, Diana taught the same lesson last year by showing the students a video of a well-known chef cooking a fish dish. She then got them to individually select a theme and write an assignment on how they would prepare and cook the dish. This year, her approach is to start the lesson with a practical demonstration and then get the students to work in small groups to discuss various themes before they individually cook a chosen dish with vegetables. In the same lesson 3 weeks ago, Diana had taken the students to a nearby market to learn about the different types of vegetables and fish available locally. The students had clearly enjoyed the educational visit, so in this lesson, she planned for the students to do some practical work and use both experiences to help them write their assignment. The praise sandwich approach generally starts with the praise, then comes with the constructive criticism, and then praise again. This is how the sandwich looks like. Diana had asked a colleague who is a qualified teacher trainer and an experienced practitioner to observe the 2-hour lesson. She met the observer for 30 minutes 2 days before the lesson took place to briefly discuss the learning needs of the group and how they were progressing in their learning. At the meeting, Diana also shared with her observer the scheme of work and the lesson plan, which identified the following learning aim and objectives for the session. The major aim for the session was create a themed fish dish with vegetables. Objectives were the learners will be able to select a theme for cooking the dish. They had to choose a theme and use fish as one of the main ingredients. Second objective was to prepare the fish and vegetables ready for cooking. Then cook the fish and vegetables according to the selected theme. Serve the themed fish dish with vegetables. Create a list of criteria to evaluate the themed fish dish. Evaluate the themed fish dish using the agreed criteria. Diana used the pre-meeting to explain how this time she has planned to use more active learning methods because in the last year's lesson, the group being taught clearly became bored watching a 30-minute video. As a result, they became very demotivated when required to produce their written assignment. The observer was supplied with blank copies of the observation record form, and Diana arranged for the feedback session to take place 2 days after the lesson was taught. While it is often common practice to give immediate lesson feedback, Diana felt it was better for both her and the observer to have some time to reflect on how the lesson went. It would also ensure the professional discussion would focus on the new approach being taken and how learning was being facilitated. I will post the copy of the observation record form in the group. So after listening to this talk, you please go through the points as mentioned by the observer, highlighting the salient features of the teaching session, highlights of the activity, then in between points for development by the candidate with again a note of praise. Once you have gone through the observation record, let us continue listening to this. The main purpose of any observation record form is that it is used as the basis of a professional discussion. Between whom? Between the teacher and the mentor who observes the lesson, or between the teacher and the observer, whomsoever observes the lesson as a part of an evaluation process. Judgments on the learning outcomes achieved, whether the children really did as per the learning outcomes mentioned, did they evidently show the behavioral learning outcomes, or it can be attitudinal outcomes, or it can be cognitive outcomes, and the practical professional outcomes experienced by the teacher in planning, preparing and using the new teaching and learning approach can then be made. The completed form should be detailed enough to record the significant highlights and points for development which the observer wants to discuss in much greater detail during the feedback session. This is why an observer needs to be an experienced, supportive colleague, whom we call as a mentor, who does not try to record everything that happens in a lesson, but keeps focused on how the approaches to teaching and learning facilitate active learning. Unit 2 is all about facilitating active learning. We have already discussed and given examples of typical forms of checklists. I think I had forwarded that to you, and it was stressed that the focus of the observation should be on the learners and their learning. This means the emphasis is more on what the students are doing rather than on what the teacher is doing. To help keep this focus, an observer might ask the following questions when attempting to make judgments on how an approach or use of an activity is facilitating active learning. For example, the questions that an observer can pose to check whether any activity is facilitating active learning, any kind of an activity. The observer starts posing the following questions participate in learning activities. Did the learners participate in learning activities suitable for all of them, whatever their age, ability, or experience? Did the learners find the learning activities demanding for the range of abilities within the class? Did the learners find the learning activities motivating? Then did the learners find the activities relevant so they aroused curiosity? Did the learners make suitable progress in the learning activities to achieve all or most of the learning objectives? Did the learners participate in activities that challenged them, including the more able learners? Did the learners make relevant, spontaneous comments, ask questions, engage in debate, or offer ideas? Did the learners show a keen interest in the tasks planned for them? Did the learners have pride in their work, understand the concepts of what they have learned, and are eager to explain what they are doing and why? Did the learners interact productively as they were learning? Did the learners have their interest engaged and sustained throughout the lesson? Did the learners all participate in the lesson and keep on the task that was given? Did the learners have activities that developed and applied knowledge and skills? Did the learners have tasks that were challenging and promoted deep rather than surface learning? Did the learners have their learning work in progress constantly checked and corrected? Did the learners take sufficient responsibility for their own learning, no matter what their ability? It is also worth mentioning that in any lesson observation, the mentor or the observer, as well as the candidate, which means you as a teacher, will learn a great deal from the experience. When looking in great detail at the process of facilitating active learning as required in Unit 2, a teacher might just use one or several observers over a period of time to give feedback on the approaches being developed. If several observers are used, each one should complete an observation record form so the feedback can be used to evaluate the learning and teaching outcomes of the activity. If the same observer is used throughout the process, it is likely they will complete more than one observation record form and give feedback at appropriate intervals. The skills and experience of any professional observer invited to provide feedback on the facilitation of active learning in Unit 2 will be similar to those outlined for the observation in Unit 1, and the completion of the observation record form will also be similar. Then in Unit 3, the activity looks in greater detail at a teacher's involvement in aspects of professional development beyond the teaching learning context and away from the immediate learning environment. In Unit 3, the focus of the activity is on the ways and means of developing one's thinking about the critical awareness of the practice of teaching and training. And this means the observer's involvement will be more informal. Working with and using an experienced colleague who can meet as and when necessary often provides the most effective feedback for this activity. They will still complete one or more observation record forms to use as the basis for the professional discussions to gain feedback for evaluation purposes. No matter what activity is chosen for your Unit 3, it still requires preparation and planning, putting into action, and then reviewing and evaluating. If this process sounds familiar, it is because it is describing a learning experience. Learning to teach is no different to any other learning experience. So, again, we could use the Kolb's experiential learning cycle to model our practice.